Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we are talking about our new book, The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up. Find your path, face your shadow, discover your true self.
Super happy with this book that we have written, Bea.
I'm really happy to be able to share it with people. We wanted to write this book to invite new people into the Enneagram, to create a friendly, interesting, provocative entry point for people who maybe want to know the Enneagram, but don't really know what it's about, or maybe find it a little unapproachable. But we also wanted there to be some good stuff in there for Enneagram veterans, so that there would be something to offer them as well. What do you want to say generally about maybe the writing of this book, the motivation to write this book, and what we hope people get out of it?
So I believe that what was very hard in writing this book was to get to a good balance between having an introductory book that is also good for beginners and keeping the depth of the Enneagram and honoring the system by saying from the beginning, talking a bit more about the growth journeys, not only who people are in personality, in fun ways, and also to narrow down all that we wanted to say for each type, because it's almost infinite what we want to say. Narrow it down to the true main things that people need to know. And I don't think that all Enneagram teachers and schools see the central things for each type the same way. And I think that you and I really try to get to the original teachings and the roots of the system and what is central in people's psyches on the 9 psyche maps, as we say, and to narrow down to what really matters to help students engage with the growth activities that will help them the most.
There are a lot of books out there already, I think, good Enneagram books that describe the 9 types in detail or in different ways. And so we didn't want this to be another book that described the types. And so I know we both really liked the idea of writing an introductory book that was focused on the growth path of the types just about from the start. So, of course, we need to learn about the types to find out which type we are. But very soon, it's important to ask the question, what do I do with this now? I'm this type, so what? And I think we tried to really answer that question in this book by mapping out a 3-step growth process. Again, trying to keep it simple, but not simplistic, to honor what the Enneagram is really all about, which is deep transformation, should you desire that. But also to kind of help people understand a little bit about what that growth path takes. And I thought of it from the beginning as kind of a good news, bad news, good news story, right? I kept thinking of it that way because the good news is that you are not your personality. You're more than that. And if you find your type in the Enneagram, it's often, it can be a hard experience of seeing things in yourself that you don't want to see, but it can also be an exciting experience of having a map or a model that really helps you understand yourself at a deeper level, in some ways affirming that, yes, this is not only you, this is something other people share, but this is a pathway into learning a lot more about yourself. So it can be exciting at the beginning. But then if you're really doing the work connected to the Enneagram in a deep way, and again, I think that's what it's built for, what that means is it's going to take it's going to be challenging. You're going to have to face some shadow elements. You're going to have to deal with some of the parts of yourself that maybe you have criticized about yourself or you don't want to look at, or that create problems for you in your life. And that's a hard process. And I kept thinking about it as we all need both support and challenge. But it's the challenge part that I think we sometimes need help understanding and then really doing the workaround.
I think that one of the very many things that you added to the book was your capacity to talk about what's difficult without losing the positive spin and approach, which is also very important to keep people engaged, especially in the beginning of the Enneagram journey. I think that you're super good in this. Always also knowing how to make things simpler for people to really understand, but not with making it more shallow. It's like saying what needs to be said, but in a way that people will feel it's simple. I think that you are very organized in your mind, in how you present things. You're super good in summarizing content in a way that makes people's task easier. And if it was only me writing this book, I'm pretty sure it would be much drier, and and also, also I would have many English problems. So I gave you a big opportunity to do one of the favorite things in your life, which is editing me.
Yes, yes. I know you were horrified when you saw all the edits I did to the first chapter you wrote. Yes, well, I appreciate all you say, and I take the compliments. And I think what I really wanted this book to be was inspiring. And it's a tricky combination of things that I think people need to understand when they use the Enneagram in a really effective way as a growth map, because I think the truth is it's not going to be easy. The truth is facing our shadow is by definition challenging and painful. And so I wanted to really highlight for people in a very honest way and straightforward way, if you really want to grow, if you really want to transform, this is what you're going to have to see in yourself that you don't want to see. These are the emotions you're going to have to feel that you understandably avoid feeling. And these are the the unconscious patterns that are limiting you, that if you continue to not see or and not want to see, they'll hold you back. But that if you do have the courage to see them, and if you are willing to really look deeply at yourself, the rewards are enormous. That you can really manifest more of who you really are, and much beyond the limitations of your personality structure, which is a defensive personality structure. It was designed to defend you in life, and we need it, and it's positive for that reason. However, at a certain point in your life, if you want to grow, it's almost like you have to say to your own parts in yourself that are still defending you and can't stop, because it becomes so automatic and habitual, that okay, I need to put my defenses down now if I really want to grow into my higher side, if I really want to manifest more of my true self. I'm going to need to, you know, stop defending myself in the ways that I have before. And of course, part of the good news is when we have the courage to really let down some of our defenses, even though it can be very scary, because it's sometimes like jumping off a cliff into the unknown. The rewards are that you have more freedom, that you free up a lot of your energy that you, in an unconscious way, put into, um, habits that stop serving you after childhood, that don't really help you in the ways that you think they might, or that your ego self image might think that you need. And that there's an enormous amount of positive experience waiting for you if you can sort of travel through that underworld of coping with and challenging and letting go of some of your shadowy elements.
Yeah, I love all that you're saying, B, and it's all a path. And I love that we decided to name each chapter, each type chapter, in a very different way that most books do. Most books have names for each type, and then they say type 4, the romantic, right? So something like that. And instead, we say type 4, the path from envy to equanimity. And we do the same for all types. So from the very beginning of each chapter, we say that there is a tension between personality and essence. And we end up talking about the path between them, what to do to come closer to essence, and to negotiate space with the personality, which is our limited self. And I think this is very symbolic of what we talk about at each chapter, right?
Yes, yes. And we did want to really highlight that this book is about the path of self-development for each type. And I think naming it in terms of the path from being really stuck in and driven by the passion, which is the key emotional motivation associated with the lower emotional center of our personality, to the high side quality, the virtue, the special quality that each of us are really able to manifest in the world. That's the opposite or the antidote to our passion, the passion of our type. Was a good way to highlight that this is a path from being kind of trapped in a way that sometimes you don't see, to becoming freer and freer to express something really positive, not only for yourself, but in the world around you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really important, and at the same time, we have very practical things on the book that helps people just identify their types and talk about personality. So it's not all about the growth path. So, for instance, we have a checklist for each type in the beginning of the chapter that summarizes most of the things that people of that type should have to be that type. And then in everything we did like this, we had to narrow down what we say for what really matters for each type, getting rid of stereotyping that unfortunately exists a lot out there, and also making sure that we talk about what is really central. Uh, so things connected to the passion of type, fixation of type, which are things that we have explained already in past episodes here on Enneagram 2.0 podcast. But just very quickly, the passion is the emotional habit or emotional vice, and the fixation is a limiting belief or the mental habit of type. So we are not talking in the beginning of the chapter about each of these, but the checklist we have concentrates a lot on manifestations of these things. So I do think that we have improved uh, checklists that existed before our book by doing all this discerning work.
And of course, each type chapter starts with a little story, or it's kind of in the form of a fable or a fairy tale. And we use a theme in the book, not too heavily, but in kind of a light way, that is it, we call it the zombie theme, and it's in the beginning chapter. We talk about how um, you're probably a zombie and you don't know it, meaning we all fall asleep to who we really are. We all get caught up in automatic patterns that we do over and over again without really realizing that we're confining ourselves to a relatively narrow view of the world and ways of behaving in it. So we start each chapter with kind of an archetypal story about how that person comes to be asleep to themselves. And it wasn't my idea to write those stories. It was actually a good friend of mine who edited a couple of the first chapters really early on. And I loved the idea when she told me, when she suggested it. And so I wrote one, and I said, "Is this what you had in mind?" And she said, "That's exactly it." So it was kind of fun to write those. And I'm really looking forward to just getting some
Yeah.
feedback and seeing what people think of them.
Sure, I'll ask you towards the end of this episode if you agree to read us one of the stories, just to give our listeners a sense of those. But I also want to say that it was funny to see how we evolved in the introductory chapter. We had written so much in the beginning as an introduction, and then our very wise publisher, Greg, who I think he won't mind if I say he's an eight, and a very senior, you know, publisher. He convinced us to take most things out and go straight to the types. That was hard and fun and a big learning.
Yeah, hard and fun. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, we have to really thank Greg. I'm so grateful to him because, the whole idea for this book, or the first idea, was really his idea, and he was really with us every step of the way as a consultant, an advisor. And at the beginning of the process, I don't think we knew what type he was, but he kept saying that he wanted it to be short. And of course, if you know me, I have a very hard time writing a short book or a short anything.
And me.
And and you too, exactly. We always go longer than we want to or think we will. And I love that Mark Twain quote. I first heard Claudio Naranjo say it, and I just thought it was perfect. It was the story of my life. The Mark Twain quote is, it's something like, "I'm sorry I didn't have time to write you a shorter letter." And I think that's the way it's almost like I have to write a lot to end up writing a little bit. But yes, he was really firm in the fact that he wanted this to be as short as possible, which ended up really helping us a lot because we're two long-winded people who ended up having a lot of support and help in making this more concise, making the prose tighter, and really uh, getting rid of, as you suggest, a lot of things that probably weren't necessary in there, and really getting to the heart of the matter quickly and sticking there. As we often say about eights, they like to have things very straightforward and direct, and the important bullet points up front. And he certainly guided us and helped us and supported us in really wonderful ways in creating a book that I think ended up being um, something that people will find accessible, and maybe even a little bit fun, and also something that helps them see what the growth journey is in a clear, um, straightforward way.
Right. So we have this bias of talking too much, teaching too much, and going too much into depth. And so, do you think that this is the reason why Greg decided to hire not only someone to proofread, but also someone to really review everything.
Oh, I think it was always going to be the plan to have an editor, but I do think they ended up editing us a little bit more than average because, again, I think he had a really clear vision. And again, we needed help making it shorter and more compact. And so I think they did a good job of that. Now, I did go in after and add a few more things. I edited the edit, but I think that's just sort of a normal part of the book writing process.
Right. I want to mention, B, that I also think that this book is an indirect manifesto of us on Chestnut Pie's Enneagram Academy. In what sense? I think that we are very clear in what pieces of Enneagram theory we believe are more important and the ones we believe are valid. Um, so, for instance, we talk about wings and arrows both as paths for growth and not in the typical way that they have been talked about in the past. And some people still talk about them this way. Like just what is my strongest arrow, what is my strongest wing, and what happens in my behavioral traits. So it's not about that for us. We talk about these as growth paths and how specifically these growth paths are for each type. But also, we make sure we say other things like we have only one type and one passion, because you and I don't really follow the theory of tri-types, and yeah, and many more things that to me feel like a manifesto of the theory that we consider to be correct and that helps people the most.
Yes, I do think this book serves that purpose of kind of laying out in pretty clear terms what we believe based on our experience and experience with working with a lot of individuals and groups over many years, what we think are the most important things to know and work with in the Enneagram model if you really want to use it to further your self development journey. So, for instance, we really highlight, first of all, noticing some of your key patterns, habitual patterns that tend to be more conscious and really define your type. That's kind of the first step is finding your type and really noticing and self-observing almost on a daily, hourly basis some of those patterns, and really being in touch with, oh, here I go again, without judgment, without self-judgment, noticing those patterns that when you read an Enneagram book that describes the types, if you have even a moderate level of self-awareness, you can often go, oh yeah, I do that. It may not always feel good to admit what you do, but you can see, oh yeah, as a two, I do really care if people like me, or as a one, I do tend to follow the rules and I am very self-critical. So we highlight those, and then in the second step of the growth journey, it's all about facing the shadow. It's all about making unconscious patterns more conscious. It's all about focusing on what you tend to be motivated to go to sleep to avoid knowing about yourself, to avoid owning and really dealing with. We kind of just say this is the hard truth. This is what you need to recognize that you're doing that you might not always want to admit that you're doing. And I think, again, we tried to all along the way use language that was really non-judgmental, warm and accepting, supportive, but also honest, and sort of laying out like this is what your challenge is, should you choose to accept it. And like you said, we have pieces about the subtype and the wings and the aeroline movements in particular, because we think those elements, along with the passion and the sort of journey from sort of being driven by the passion to manifesting more of the virtue, the higher side, that vice to virtue conversion path. We talk a bit about the subtypes and the shadow of each of the subtypes, because each of us have a subtype based on which of one of the three instincts is dominant in us. And that aspect of us tends to have an even more specific shadow. And then, like you said, we talk about the wings and the airline movements as different kinds of growth pathways in very specific terms. So if you're a seven, here's what you here's how you can use points 5 and points 1 to help you grow. And again, in a paragraph, in a very concise, straightforward way, here are the things that you can do. And then the third section is about moving toward the high side. So, we don't suggest that if you follow the book, you're absolutely done with your journey. If you follow the pathway indicated in the book. However, that third part is about here's what you're aspiring to. Here's what you're moving in the direction of. And I know for me as a two, getting in touch with pride was often hard and humiliating and difficult. But one of the things that always really inspires me and motivates me and keeps me going is understanding what humility is and understanding what I can be more like if I'm really focusing on owning the pride, which isn't easy, but sort of aiming for being a more humble person in the world.
Yes, and another thing that is part of the manifesto, the indirect manifesto on this book, is our take, not only our take on subtypes, which we believe to be super important and illuminating, but also the fact that we don't talk about instincts and subtypes separate. We do not agree much when people talk about the instincts alone, disconsidering the subtype dimension, and vice versa. So I think that this was a good thing that we did in a way, and it's part of our manifesto. So don't disconsider subtypes. Don't talk only about instincts, because there will be trouble. Now, I want to send our very big thanks to three people also, and they are Russ Hudson and Ian Morgan Crown, who both shared very generous endorsements for us, and also pretty much Dan Siegel and his team, who wrote the preface and the foreword. So we're super happy with that, because the three of them are people we highly respect.
Yes, I'm so glad you remembered to thank those people. Also, Amanda Braga, who created the figures for the book, and who, of course, supports us in so many ways. But really, really grateful to Ross Hudson and Ian Morgan Cron, who were very generous in their recommendation of this book, their endorsement. But also want to say a little bit about Dan Siegel, because Dan Siegel, as many people know, is a really important figure, I think, right now in the field of psychospiritual development. He's a psychiatrist at UCLA, an expert in interpersonal neurobiology. He's written many books about the developing brain, and there's one of my favorite books of his is called Mind Sight, and it's all about self-observation. He learned the Enneagram many years ago and started collaborating on a project with David Daniels, our teacher and mentor, beloved friend who passed away a few years ago. And David Daniels and David's daughter, Denise Daniels, who's a good friend of ours, who is a PhD in psychology and a researcher in psychology, and also Jack Killen, who many people in the Enneagram community may know. He's an amazing man, a doctor, worked for many years in at the National Institute of Health, and it was a, a, head of one of the Enneagram organizations for several years. And then Laura Baker, who's a good friend of Denise's. The five of them started off um, on a project to write about the Enneagram from a more scientific point of view, helping people in the scientific community understand more about what it was and how it was related to different scientific concepts. They are actually working on a book right now themselves. And so Dan and that team of researchers, they wrote the forward for our book, and we're really grateful to them for doing that for us.
Sure, yeah, and I want to thank also all the team on Hampton Roads, our publisher company, not only Greg. Um, Now, I think B that we also can say that with Russ Hudson, we share something that the three of us consider super important, which is an approach to the Enneagram always as a transformative system, and the fact that we see all the work to be done with it in a psycho spiritual way. And I was going to ask you to say something also about Ian Morgan Crown, because you have taught together with him at times, and you're friends. I have the pleasure of having recorded the podcast with him, but I'm still looking forward to meeting him in person. So, any word about Ian?
Yeah, Ian is a wonderful person. He is an Episcopal priest as well as a psychotherapist. He wrote two really successful books before he wrote The Road Back to You, which is his kind of Enneagram primer a few years ago. And just a person who's really doing his own work and is has a real talent for describing the human condition and the human growth path in his own ways that are really poetic and beautiful and funny. And he actually has a new book coming out next year that I'm looking forward to. And he has been really supportive and a great friend in the work.
Right. What else, B, would you like to say about the book or about the process of writing the book? Was it too difficult to work with me?
You really want to ask me that? I would say it wasn't too difficult. As always, it's always a deep pleasure to work with you. Even when we're under stress, we manage to use our challenges as growth opportunities, which is something I really appreciate about you. Yeah, and it's always a bit of pressure when you're writing on a deadline, but I thought we worked together really well. Um,
Can you remind me how we managed to write the book with such a heavy teaching agenda?
Well, I, I frankly think it might not have happened if we didn't have COVID that slowed us
Oh
down.
yeah,
I think if we were on our usual travel schedule like we had been, we might not have actually had the time. But I think, writing it during, much of 2020 helped us have the time to devote to it that maybe we wouldn't have, because we had to cancel a lot of things before we kind of made the pivot to doing more things online. But I think it's hard to when writing the book isn't your only day job. But I think it was I really appreciated the experience. I think it was interesting when I recently I had the great pleasure of having Antonia Dodge do a Myers Briggs typing interview for me. They call it a profiling interview, where she asked me a bunch of questions on stage at one of their trainings, one of Personality Hackers trainings, and to sort of use me as a demonstration for how she does a profiling interview. And it was really interesting. In that interview, she asked me about creativity. And I learned something about myself. And that was I've never really thought of myself as a creative person. I've always thought creative is what other people are, but I'm sort of practical and I'm not very creative. And what I realized, even in answering her questions, is I think I have more creativity in me than I've given myself credit for. And I think I really enjoyed the process of creating this book and creating it with you. Because I think there were a lot of decisions about, okay, what is this book going to be? And I always appreciate the evolution of a project like this, because you have ideas at first, and you have to revise and revise and revise those ideas until you get to something that feels right and something that will work for the reader. And so I think that we had a really nice process supported by Greg Brandenburg, our publisher, that of evolving. Like at one point, we wanted maybe a little bit more reference to the hero's journey, the archetypal hero's journey. But at one point, we figured, that was not really necessary and kind of added a complication to the book. That although I love the hero's journey and I love that everything connected to that idea and everything that's been written about that, we didn't really need it, and it made it a little bit too complex. And so sort of letting go of certain things you thought you wanted, having new ideas about how to organize it, I think the whole process was a good challenge, and also a gratifying, satisfying experience of being able to co-create something that we hope people will benefit from.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I agree with all this, but that didn't prevent us, the two of us, to have several discussions about what to do, what not to do, and I think that not only the two of us, but all better known Enneagram teachers are very opinionated. They, in a way, have strong personalities, regardless of their types. And yes, so it's very fun, very nice, lots of learning also for me to work with you. And both of us are not always easy, you know. So this is what I mean.
Hi! If you're enjoying the depth of knowledge offered in this podcast, you might want to stay in touch with us. Bea and Uranio offer professional Enneagram training, personal development courses, self-guided online courses, and they even have a membership platform with over 100 hours of content. Head to cpenneagram.com/podcast to learn more.
I also want to say that this book wouldn't have happened also without our students who we work with all the time in very experiential ways. We dedicated the book to them, actually. And I'm super, super grateful for all of them, because although you and I have read all that there is to be read, Enneagram wise, it's only with the experiences we have with our students that we get to the discernment that we got on the book.
Yes, yeah, I'm glad you remembered to thank all the people who attend our workshops and retreats and are so dedicated to their own inner work and often to supporting the work of others, and the 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 sort of the quest for higher consciousness in the world. I think that motivates us so much of wanting to help people be more aware and conscious, so that we can have a more conscious world. We need that, otherwise we may not survive with everything that's happening in the world today.
So, B, before we finish, would you agree to read one of the tales of one of the nine types, which open the type chapters on the book?
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea to give people a little bit of a flavor of each of these stories that opens each type chapter. So, how about if I read the tale, the little fable for type one?
Yeah, I know you like that a lot, so go ahead.
Yeah, although my favorite one, the one that makes me cry, is type 8. But I won't read that.
I think I've
Um,
seen you cry in many of them. I remember
well,
you crying on
I,
type 7 and so on.
I do cry easily. That's true. Yeah. And so I just want to say a word about the intention of these. One of the things we wanted to highlight is not that type develops in childhood, but that we come in as a type, and that when we come into the world, we're actually connected to some essential qualities, some higher qualities. But as we have to survive in the world as children, we grow more and more toward personality. We fall more and more asleep. We lose touch with those high qualities because we need to survive in the world as human beings. But that the way we fall asleep, the patterns we fall into of our type, are a reflection of the higher side qualities that we're trying to mimic in a way, or find a substitute for. So I just wanted to give that piece, because sometimes people might think that, oh, they're saying that type develops early in childhood, but it's actually not that. It's that we think we come in with some gifts that kind of get taught out of us, but of course we make our way back to when we do conscious inner growth work. Okay, so that's a little bit of an introduction. And so this is the tale from the opening of the first type chapter for type 1. Once upon a time, there was a person named One. He came into this world as a spontaneous child ready to appreciate the inherent perfection of life. Completely serene and accepting, he felt free to experience joy and fun in everything he did. He took things lightly and flowed flexibly with life, with himself, and with everyone around him. But early in life, One had a painful experience of feeling criticized. When this happened, he felt pressured to conform to others' standards of good behavior. One unconsciously tried to cope with the pain of feeling judged and punished by proactively monitoring and criticizing himself before others had a chance to. He internalized the standards others applied to him and tried to be good and do the right thing all the time. He began to feel that he had to be perfect to be seen as worthy, and that he had to work hard to control himself in order to be good. In his quest to be good, One developed an ability to notice and correct his own errors, to see how everything he did could be more perfect, and to determine what needed to be improved in the world around him. He worked hard to uphold the highest standards of good behavior, and he judged people harshly who didn't follow the rules. He became excellent at making things excellent, including himself. He evaluated everything he saw in terms of how bad or wrong it was, most of all himself. Over time, One became very good at being virtuous and avoiding mistakes. He found the best ways to do things and adhered to all of the rules of good behavior all the time. He criticized himself whenever something turned out imperfectly, which of course was all the time, and he tried to do better the next time. But in the process of getting better and being better, One lost touch with many aspects of himself. He stopped feeling or doing, here come the tears. He stopped feeling or doing anything that might have even the smallest chance of being considered wrong. He lost most of his awareness of his instinctual impulses, his feelings, his creativity, and his spontaneity. He lost touch with his own inner sense of what felt right, but might be judged as wrong. By imposing strict limits on himself, One learned to avoid anything that could possibly be wrong, including his own deepest rhythms, wishes, and dreams. He often became angry when others didn't follow the rules, but instead of expressing his anger, he hid his feelings and tried to be nice. He prioritized being ethical, reliable, and responsible in everything he did. He felt compelled to control everything he possibly could to make sure that he got things right every time, and he punished himself when he didn't. His survival strategy wouldn't let him do anything else, and he felt irritated about that too, but couldn't let anyone know that he felt irritated. What One didn't realize was that everyone around him did know he was angry, because when he enforced what was right, He often stomped around or banged his fist on the table or talked in a sarcastic tone of voice. It became part of the way he operated when in survival mode. He didn't necessarily like it. In fact, it was very hard on him, but he couldn't stop it. He couldn't acknowledge his anger because being angry was not good. Sometimes he felt tired and sad as a result, almost letting himself feel. But what could he do? One eventually became completely deadened to any real sense of himself. He fell asleep to his own inherent goodness, a goodness that revealed itself in his good intentions and his genuine desire to be a good person. He could only keep following the rules and working hard to meet the highest standards in everything he did. But he also completely lost awareness of his deeper human need for fun and relaxation, as well as his basic human wish to be bad once in a while. One had become a zombie, a very polite, appropriate, rule following zombie, but a zombie just the same. I want to say one thing is the book is about how we all become zombies, not just ones, of course, and how we can wake up and become more alive in our life. It's time for our top 5.
What is our top 5 today, Bea?
Our top 5 today is the top 5 things we enjoyed about writing our new book, The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up.
Okay, yeah. I think this will be perhaps at times personal, and wondering if there will be similarities and how many between yours and mine.
Yeah. For some reason, I think there'll be less similarities in this one.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because as I was thinking of the top 5 things I enjoyed, I was thinking writing a book is hard. like the things I didn't enjoy are a little bit more top
Uh,
of mind, let's say.
yeah. Especially before the book is published, but now we're happy that it came out. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that should be one of on our list. The top 5 things is getting it done and having it be over.
Yeah. So, what is your number 5?
So my number 5 was I enjoyed a particular challenge, and that was the challenge of making it short and light, because we had a particular goal in mind for this book, which was actually suggested to us by our publisher. He really wanted this to be an introductory book that was on the shorter side, that was more accessible. And when I thought about that, I thought I wanted it to be both profound, but also light. I wanted it to be something that people enjoyed reading, that people found was maybe a little bit funny or enjoyable to experience. So as you know, and as others may know, I have a really hard time writing things that are short. It's that Mark Twain quote: "I didn't have time to write you a shorter letter. Sorry." And so, but it was good to try to be concise. It was good to try to be short, and it was good to try to be a little bit light and funny to help people understand that although the growth journey can be really challenging, that it can also be something that is enjoyable to engage in.
Mm, okay.
What's your top 5? What's your 5?
My number 5 is to write an Enneagram book finally. Because
Yes.
differently than you, who is already a well-known Enneagram author, I'm not. Because in my life, I have had some other priorities, like I recorded tons of videos in our online platform for years, and so the book was always being postponed. um, yeah, I do see in fives like me a tendency to postpone writing books. It's like they postpone writing books because fives focus on what they still don't know, right? Not what they know. Um, so I need to celebrate that finally I'm also an Enneagram author.
Yes, that's great. That's great. So my number 4 top reason I liked writing the book was I liked writing about the blind spots and the practical growth steps. Because wherever I go, different people I talk to, people who reach out to me to talk about the Enneagram, I often hear the question of what what do I do with this? What do I do now? Now I know my type. What can I do about it? And so it was a book that we wrote that very much focused on making blind spots and the shadow side more available to consciousness, which I think is a huge part of the growth aspect of the Enneagram, and then offering actionable growth steps for each type.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I think that I took this top five a bit differently than you. I'm not referring as much to the content that we wrote. I was in a doubt, and I was going to include, for instance, the higher sides of type that we included on each chapter, one of my favorites, but I didn't. So the thing I said as my number 4 is very personal. It really doesn't apply to you. It's the fact that I wrote it with you in English.
Oh, yes, I that's a big achievement writing in a language that's not your
Well,
native language.
I don't know if that was any kind of achievement, because one of your favorite jobs is to edit me. Even if I was writing in my native language, Portuguese, you would have edited a lot. But in English, it was like every phrase, right? And and that means that it was a bit. There was one side of it that made me suffer, but another side, which is more important for me, is that I had lots of opportunities to learn because of my mistakes. And it's not easy to write a book in a language that is not your native, but it was a good challenge.
Well, it's funny that that's your number 4 because my number 3 thing I liked about writing the book was correcting your English.
Oh my God.
Uh,
Wow.
as you
Uh-huh.
know, I love editing, and
Mm.
sometimes I would just giggle to myself when I see the way you wrote something. And I
Really?
just think you can be very funny when you speak English. And there were many opportunities to laugh with you, with a lot of appreciation about both how you were meeting this challenge of writing in not in a language not your first language, but also just some of the funny ways you put things.
Yeah, but as our listeners can always hear when I'm speaking, right? Now, I don't think that would have made to the your top five if it was only about editing or editing English. It's because you're editing my English. This is why yeah, you really like that, don't you? Mm,
Well,
okay. Don't deny it.
it's
Yeah.
just because sometimes you put things in a funny way, and it made
Mm,
the editing process more amusing. Let's put it that way.
okay. Yeah. Okay. My number 3 is learning how to summarize our teaching. So when we write a book with a wise editor saying we need this book to be at, at most this long, and we write a first edition with almost double that length, then we need to summarize the teaching in ways that will still keep the core of it. And then we start developing new ways of explaining things more efficiently, and new terminology, new ways of explaining things, also in a better order of the factors. So that was something I enjoyed doing, not as much while I was doing it, but the result of that was brilliant for me.
So my number 2 thing I enjoyed about writing the book was working with you.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Why? If my
Well,
English was so bad.
well, when we first started, I think we were thinking, well, maybe I would write the chapters and then you would offer input and kind of review them and shape them further and add things. But you ended up writing several of the chapters, I think almost half the chapters. And we wouldn't have gotten the book finished if it weren't for that. So you really did the hard work of writing several chapters in a language not your own. And of course, I always like working with you. I always like any way that we partner, because it helps. It's such a nice experience to feel so aligned with someone, to feel a sense of common purpose with someone, to feel like we're really taking action in a meaningful way on a common mission that we have together. So I just like you a lot, and it was fun to have this really different kind of project to collaborate on.
Well, thank you. It means a lot to me. Thank you. My number two is the fact that on the book we had the opportunity to state a clear position in Enneagram theory, to include the things that we value, to leave out the things that we don't value much, to emphasize things that we think are more important, and sometimes even to say what we don't agree with. And I think that makes the book not only the good reading, but also, as we said at the podcast, a manifesto. And I love that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's well said. That's a really good one. My number one is, it's a little bit twofold, but mainly it's the opportunity to write a book where we really emphasize the growth path for the types. So it wasn't a description of the 9 types, although that's in there. And if you don't know the 9 types, you'll learn about them if when you by reading the chapters. But right away, uh, when you locate your type, it takes you on a growth journey. And I loved that. And the create and sort of the opportunity to try to be creative in finding good ways to do that were both sort of concise and accessible and compact, but also really getting to the heart of the matter, really getting to the deep work that each type needs to do, was a great it was a great process. And then I want to put in there with this, I enjoyed the process of writing the tales that start each chapter. I thought it was something kind of different that you don't often see, and I liked kind of going to that higher level of how does this type come in essence, and how does their personality get formed in a way that they go into a kind of sleepwalking mode, that we call zombie mode. How does that happen? And I enjoyed that creative process of really helping people see how things get started, and what the path out is, what the way what the method is for reanimating the zombie.
Right. Yeah. I would have been surprised if you hadn't mentioned the tales in the beginning of the chapter somewhere on your top 5. Yeah. Okay, so do you want to know my number one?
Of course.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Mm. Guess what? It's that I wrote the book with you,
Oh,
B.
nice. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that is super, super, super important. That was the main thing for me. And I'm celebrating because you said a similar thing in second, and I said this in first, which means
Yes.
that I'm not making the same mistake from our episode number 0 that I still remember to these days, and I'm not making the same mistake with my type 2 friend.
Oh wow, you're really modeling learning about the Enneagram and relationships. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, yeah, and hopefully you don't feel bad that that was in my number 2 position, because
No,
the
not at all.
only thing that would be more important than that, or more enjoyable, is the
Yeah,
satisfaction of really
yeah.
helping people grow.
Yeah, I think I might be able to sleep tonight. Don't worry. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for listening to us. And we hope you join us again for our Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.